Imagine this. You're at a fertility clinic. A friendly technician hands you a glossy pamphlet. On the cover, a smiling baby with sparkling blue eyes and a caption that reads, "Build your future. Gene editing for a brighter tomorrow." Inside, there's a menu of genetic enhancements: immunity to disease, increased height, higher IQ, athletic prowess, even personality traits. It reads like science fiction, but the truth is, it's already starting. We're not heading toward this future. We're standing right at its doorstep. Welcome to the era of gene editing, where science has given us the power to rewrite the very code of life. With tools like CRISPR, short for clustered regularly, interspaced short palindromic repeats, scientists can now cut, delete, and replace fragments of DNA with remarkable precision. Think of it like a pair of molecular scissors guided by a GPS, allowing us to target the exact spot in our genetic code where we want to make changes. It's fast, cheap, and effective, and in the world of genetics, it's a total game changer. But here's the catch. This technology isn't just revolutionizing medicine, it's shaking the very foundation of what it means to be human. Originally discovered in bacteria as a defense mechanism against viruses, CRISPR was adapted in 2012 by researchers Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier. By 2015, scientists had already used it to correct mutations in human embryos, and just a few years later, those experiments moved from the lab to life. The world watched in disbelief in 2018 when Chinese biophysicist He Jiankui announced that he had successfully created the first gene-edited babies, twin girls born with modified genes to resist HIV infection. At first, the news seemed like a scientific triumph, but then the ethical storm began. Jiankui had ignored global ethical standards, failed to conduct transparent peer-reviewed research, and worst of all, performed irreversible edits on embryos without fully understanding the long-term consequences. For the scientific community, it was a nightmare come to life. He was imprisoned by Chinese authorities, but the shockwaves of his actions were already rippling across the globe. Because despite the public outcry, many began to quietly wonder, what if he wasn't the only one? What if other labs, less transparent, less accountable, were already experimenting behind closed doors? This moment marked a turning point. What had started as a tool to correct deadly mutations like those found in sickle cell anemia or muscular dystrophy suddenly revealed its double edge. If we can eliminate disease with gene editing, what's to stop us from enhancing intelligence, from changing physical features, from removing traits society deems undesirable? And who gets to decide what's desirable in the first place? Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, Cosmic Whispers is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community. Together, let's be clear, there's real hope in this technology. Gene therapy trials using CRISPR have already shown promise in treating conditions like beta thalassemia and Leber's congenital amaurosis, a form of childhood blindness. Patients who once faced devastating diagnoses are now seeing the possibility of a cure. But for every step forward, there's a shadow creeping behind. Some biotech companies are already exploring the commercial potential of gene enhancement, not just therapy. Imagine a future where the wealthy can engineer designer children, optimized for beauty, brains, and elite performance, while others are left behind, genetically natural and perhaps increasingly disadvantaged. We're talking about a potential split in humanity, one based not on race, nationality, or class, but on code, and it gets darker. As countries race to dominate the field, some governments are already considering gene editing for military applications. Increased strength, faster reflexes, resistance to pain or fear. Super soldiers may not be just a Marvel fantasy, they could become a strategic objective. And once that door is opened, how do we close it? Gene editing is no longer just about healing. It's about control, political control, economic control, even evolutionary control. And once this power is in the hands of those with the resources to use it, how long before it's abused? Are we prepared for a world where human beings can be upgraded like software, and where natural birth becomes a disadvantage? This is the world we're heading toward, a world filled with promise and peril. And as the science accelerates, so must the conversation. Let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, how did we get here? How did we go from curing diseases to contemplating the creation of superhumans? What seemed like a distant dream only a few decades ago is now inching closer to reality. And that reality isn't all science fiction. It all started with the very essence of life itself, our DNA. The structure, the building blocks, the genetic instructions that make us who we are. In the 1950s, scientists James Watson and Francis Crick unlocked the secret of the double helix, revealing the intricate code that governs every living thing. Since then, biology has taken one giant leap after another. And the Human Genome Project, completed in 2323 years ago, mapped all 3 billion letters of our DNA. But mapping it wasn't enough. We wanted to change it, and that desire to alter life's blueprint became the driving force behind today's revolution in genetic engineering. Enter CRISPR. This technology has fundamentally changed how we view genetics. It's not just a tool for researchers to study mutations, it's a tool that allows us to make real-time changes. But here's the kicker. With this level of precision, the potential for both healing and harm is massive. We've all heard about the promise of gene editing in curing genetic disorders. But what if the same technology, the same power to heal, could be used to create monsters? What if gene editing became a tool not for curing, but for controlling? And here's where things start to get complicated. On one side, you have bioethicists and scientists arguing for responsible use of CRISPR, ensuring that it's only used to cure diseases, eradicate genetic disorders, and improve quality of life. On the other side, you have those with a different vision, a vision where gene editing is not just about healing, but about enhancing. What if this technology could be used to design humans, animals, and even entire species for specific purposes? What if you could create people who were smarter, stronger, faster? People who could be tailored to fill specific roles in society? Imagine an army of genetically engineered soldiers, each one superior to the last, designed for combat, trained for warfare, programmed for obedience. This idea isn't just some far-fetched plotline from a dystopian novel. It's already being explored. In 2019, China's military began funding research into genetically modified soldiers. Their aim: to create enhanced troops capable of withstanding harsh conditions, healing faster, and exhibiting superior cognitive abilities. It's a chilling thought. What happens when this kind of power is placed in the hands of authoritarian regimes or powerful corporations with no checks and balances? The idea of designer babies, a term that sounds like it belongs in the world of luxury fashion, has already gone beyond speculation. Companies like GeneX and Genetic Vision are working on ways to offer parents the chance to genetically enhance their future children. Want a child with the brain power to be the next Nobel Prize winner, or a child with a resistance to aging? Well, for a price, some biotech firms are already making that possible. They're offering parents the ability to choose eye color, height, and even a child's predisposition to certain skills. These possibilities are no longer confined to the realm of ethical debate. They're being marketed as a new form of parenting. But what about those who can't afford it? Will this new era of genetic engineering create a two-tier society, where the wealthy can buy genetic enhancements for their children, while the rest of us are left behind? Will the future become a race where the genetically modified are the elite, and the rest are forced to settle for whatever they were born with? And then there's the looming question of what happens when gene editing becomes just another tool in the arsenal of genetic surveillance. Governments could use this technology to monitor and manipulate populations, creating a society where everyone's genetic makeup is scrutinized, controlled, and even altered to fit a desired standard. Imagine a government that could at will erase genes associated with mental illness, criminal behavior, or even political dissent. Suddenly, the power of gene editing isn't about healing or enhancing. It's about control on an unimaginable scale. Imagine this future scenario. You're a parent, and your child is offered a genetic upgrade. Nothing major, just a slight tweak. A bit more resilience to stress, perhaps. A bit more emotional stability. Your child could have a better chance of getting into an Ivy League school or landing that prestigious job. The offer seems harmless at first, but what happens when these small tweaks become more significant? What happens when parents start editing their children's future to secure their place in a world that's becoming increasingly competitive? What happens when gene editing goes from a tool of healing to a tool of class warfare? Every advancement in science comes with risks, but this feels different. The implications of gene editing go beyond medicine. They touch every part of what makes us human, our freedom, our agency, our ability to choose who we want to be. We stand on the edge of a world where our very DNA is no longer just a reflection of who we are. It's a product that can be bought, sold, and shaped at will. And if we're not careful, we may end up living in a world where the people who make the decisions about who we are not the scientists, but the corporations and governments with the most to gain. The deeper we dive into this technology, the more we realize we may be tinkering with something far more dangerous than we ever imagined. The ethical boundaries are starting to blur, and the risks are escalating. The question isn't whether we can use gene editing to change humanity, it's whether we should. So far, we've scratched the surface of the possibilities gene editing opens up. We've explored the promise of curing diseases, the potential for human enhancement, and the chilling prospect of genetic manipulation becoming a tool for control. But we haven't yet talked about the hidden dangers, those that come from the technology itself. Gene editing isn't perfect. In fact, it's far from it. Sure, CRISPR offers unprecedented precision, but that doesn't mean it's flawless. In fact, with every new development, we're learning that the human genome is far more complex than we ever imagined, and tinkering with it can lead to unpredictable, sometimes catastrophic, consequences. One of the most significant risks lies in what scientists call off-target effects. When using CRISPR to edit genes, the technology isn't always as precise as we'd like it to be. In some cases, the cut made by the molecular scissors can unintentionally affect other parts of the genome, parts that might not be involved in the intended mutation. These off-target effects can result in unexpected health complications, such as cancer or genetic diseases that weren't present in the original DNA. While researchers are constantly working to improve the technology's accuracy, every new breakthrough reveals just how little we truly understand the full scope of genetic editing. One study in 2020 found that CRISPR could inadvertently lead to mutations in hundreds of places within a genome, changes that could be passed down to future generations. So what happens when we start editing the genes of embryos? What happens when those unintended genetic alterations manifest as health problems that don't show up for years, or worse, decades? The question becomes even more urgent when you realize that some of these mistakes could affect not just one person, but an entire family, an entire lineage. When you start editing embryos, you're not just changing the future of one individual, you're altering the genetic makeup of an entire generation. Now imagine a world where these off-target effects aren't just an accident, they're the result of a conscious decision. Picture this: a pharmaceutical company or a government, intent on controlling a population's genetic makeup, starts to employ gene editing not just for medical purposes, but for political ones. They might start editing out certain traits they deem undesirable, like a genetic predisposition for depression or a certain susceptibility to addiction. These changes, though made with the best of intentions, could alter the course of an individual's life in ways we can't even predict. And the scariest part, we might never even know it's happening. Genetic changes can be subtle, hidden in the layers of DNA passed down through generations. A child born from gene-edited embryos might look perfectly healthy, just as intelligent, just as physically fit, just as capable as any other child. But a silent genetic flaw could be lurking in their DNA, one that could cause health problems years down the line, and one that may not even be traceable to the original genetic modification. Imagine being able to manipulate genes without fully understanding the consequences, without truly knowing how these changes will affect not just individuals, but entire societies. We're also facing the ethical dilemma of designer babies. It's one thing to cure diseases or eliminate harmful genetic mutations, but what happens when we start selecting traits based on superficial qualities? What if parents, given the chance to genetically choose traits for their children, decide that intelligence, beauty, or athleticism are more important than health? It's not just a slippery slope, it's a dangerous descent. These choices could create a world where traits like height, eye color, or cognitive ability become markers of social status. A world where genetic modifications aren't about survival or well-being. They're about conforming to a new rigid standard of perfection. Think about the implications of that for a moment. What happens to a child who doesn't meet those standards? What happens to the kids who were born without the advantages of gene editing? What happens to those who are natural and flawed, as society might deem them? In a world where genetic modifications create the ideal human, there's no room for anything outside of that narrow definition. It becomes a world where everyone is expected to meet a certain genetic threshold or be seen as inferior. And let's be honest, if this becomes the norm, who's going to want to be natural anymore? But it doesn't stop there. As gene editing becomes more common, we also risk creating a dangerous division between the genetically privileged and the rest of society. Imagine a future where the wealthy can afford to give their children every advantage possible, be it cognitive enhancement, physical superiority, or resistance to aging, while the poor are left to deal with the effects of genetic diseases and inherited disadvantages. The gap between the rich and the poor would widen to unimaginable proportions. Genetic inequality could become the new class divide, and the ramifications of this are staggering. It's not just about a few rich families getting ahead. It's about entire systems being built around genetic superiority. Imagine a world where hiring practices, education systems, and even relationships are dictated by genetic traits, where job opportunities are based on your genetic code rather than your abilities, and where people's worth is determined by how closely their genes align with society's ideal template. This might sound like a dystopian nightmare, but if we're not careful, it could become our reality. Gene editing may offer the promise of a future free from disease, suffering, and genetic disorders, but it also carries with it a burden of responsibility we're not yet fully prepared for. In our rush to perfect humanity, we might lose sight of what it means to be human in the first place. The temptation to play God, to mold the future of our species, is a powerful one. But we must ask ourselves, are we prepared to live with the consequences? We've ventured deep into the world of gene editing, but as we stand at the edge of this brave new world, we're left with one burning question. Should we be scared? The answer, like everything in science, isn't black and white. Yes, there are undeniable risks, ethical, biological, and societal. The dangers of gene editing are not just theoretical anymore, they're real and they're evolving every day. But before we jump to conclusions, it's important to remember the other side of the coin. Because while we're talking about the potential for dystopia, we also need to consider the undeniable promise gene editing holds. On the one hand, gene editing could bring about revolutionary advances in medicine. In 2021, researchers used CRISPR to treat sickle cell anemia, one of the most devastating genetic disorders, by editing the DNA of patients' bone marrow. In another groundbreaking experiment, CRISPR was used to treat a genetic form of blindness, restoring vision in patients who had been blind for years. These are not distant possibilities. They're happening right now. These kinds of treatments could save millions of lives, offering cures for diseases that were once considered incurable. In a world where millions suffer from genetic disorders, gene editing could be a beacon of hope, a chance for a future free from the chains of inherited diseases. But the darker possibilities can't be ignored. As we push forward, we must consider the deeper ethical questions. If gene editing can eliminate suffering, should we push the boundaries even further? Can we justify editing the human genome to create a better version of humanity? Or does that open up a Pandora's box that we're not ready to handle? In our quest for perfection, we risk losing what makes us truly human. The imperfections, the diversity, the very essence of what makes us unique. Let's talk about regulation for a moment. If we're going to allow this kind of power to exist, we need strict laws and oversight to ensure it's used for the right purposes. There must be global standards, a framework to protect not only individual rights, but also the integrity of humanity itself. It's not enough to simply say no to genetic modifications. We need to have discussions, global discussions, on where the line should be drawn. Should we edit human embryos for cosmetic traits? Should we be able to design intelligence or physical abilities? What role should governments and biotech companies play in regulating this technology? These are the questions that we as a society must answer, because if we leave it to a few corporations or governments to decide, we might end up living in a world where the genetic elite rule over the rest. It's not just about science. It's about human rights. Who gets to decide what makes a perfect human? Who has the power to create, modify, or destroy life in this new genetic frontier? And let's not forget the power of nature itself. One of the scariest aspects of gene editing is that once these changes are made, they're permanent. Every edit, every change, every tweak can be passed down for generations. What happens if we make the wrong choice? The consequences of our mistakes could echo through time, forever altering the course of humanity. We're talking about the power to reshape life as we know it, but once that power is in our hands, it becomes our responsibility to wield it wisely. As we look to the future, it's important to recognize that we are on the cusp of something extraordinary. Gene editing is the key to unlocking a new chapter in human evolution, but like all power, it comes with responsibility. We have the potential to cure diseases, to eliminate suffering, to create a world where our children don't have to inherit the genetic burdens of the past. But we also have the potential to create a world of genetic inequality, social division, and unimaginable control. The truth is, we don't have all the answers yet. The science is still young and the ethical debates are just beginning. But one thing is certain, gene editing is a technology that will shape the future. The question we must ask ourselves isn't whether we can use it, but whether we should. Are we ready for the consequences of what we're about to unleash? Or are we simply too eager to play God, to take control of a force that once unleashed may be impossible to control? Gene editing has already taken a dark turn. The question is, will we be the ones to steer it back into the light, or will we allow it to spiral into chaos? Only time will tell. What do you think? Are we opening Pandora's box, or are we simply unlocking the next step in human evolution? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's continue the conversation. If you found this video eye-opening, give it a like, share it with your friends, and let's keep talking about the future of humanity. The journey is just beginning, and your voice matters more than ever. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep discovering.